Hello, and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Bryant, and I'll be your host for this webinar. Please make sure your microphones and web cameras are disabled during the presentation to provide a smooth recording. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You're welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments and insights. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our upcoming webinars are on April 17th, and that will be How to Analyze Genealogical Sources with James Tanner. That'll be Friday at 4 p.m. If you'd like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Kathryn Grant, who will be giving a presentation on using Tree Sweeper to improve accuracy in family tree. After years on the sidelines, Kathryn began doing family history and discovered that she loved it. Her specialty is helping new family historians find success and maybe even avoid some of the mistakes she's made. Kathryn teaches Sunday classes at the BYU Family History Library. She also presents at Riverton, Utah Saturday seminars and other family history events. Her column on family history ran in the Nauvoo Times for about a year and is still available online. In addition, she is a regular contributor to the Family Search blog. Kathryn works as a technical writer and instructional designer with a focus on usability and process improvement. Besides family history, she loves uplifting music, thought-provoking books, and springtime. If Kathryn is ready, then we'll turn the time over to her.
Yes, Bryant, thank you so much. Let's get the screen share going here. Okay, everybody, welcome. We are so glad to have you join us for this webinar today. And I'm excited about this webinar because I want to share about a tool that could be very helpful to you in your family history. And it's called Tree Sweeper, and it can be used to improve accuracy in family tree. So let's go ahead and look at what we'll be covering today. We've just got 3 items. First of all, what is Tree Sweeper and why is it helpful? Then we'll take a quick tour of Tree Sweeper, and then because examples are typically the most useful, we're going to run through 2. We will have an example that is simple, kind of a basic one, and then we will also do a custom example that is just a little bit more specific. I don't want to say complicated, but it does take a little bit more to set up, but I think you'll see why that's useful. So into our first topic, Tree Sweeper. What is it and why is it helpful? Have you ever seen mistakes in family tree? I think I hear people laughing. I'm just kidding because I don't have audio to hear, everybody's muted, but I kind of suspect that some people are kind of chuckling over this. So for example, a child born after a mother's death. Not going to happen, right? This is actually one of my favorites where this mother and her children all had the unique talent of living to be 100 or 101. So if 1 or 2 of the kids had lived to be that long, I'd buy it. When all of them are living that old, I want to check that out. I think probably something's going on there. Or here's another example. This is actually a really common one in family tree, and that is that you will find a child being christened before she was even born. Not going to happen, right? Well, guess what? We're all human, and so mistakes are going to happen. And they do happen in family tree, and sometimes people get frustrated over that. But I'll tell you, I sure prefer having a collaborative tree over a tree such as, for those of you who may remember using the old system, which ironically was called New Family Search, In that system, we had only very limited collaboration and no editing. So you could add stuff, but you couldn't clean stuff up. I would so much rather have a collaborative tree, even with all the mistakes. And I really do believe that Family Tree is getting better and better. So as we all work together to clean up these mistakes, we're making a better tree. So Tree Sweeper is one of the tools that can help us clean up Family Tree. And that's one of the reasons that I am so thrilled with it, because I believe that it's a very useful tool. So Tree Sweeper sweeps your tree, so to speak, or basically crawls your lines to look for problems like these. Children born before their parents' birth or after their parents' death. Parents having children at unrealistic or impossible ages. Could a woman have a child at 55? Yes. Is it very likely? Not so much. So Tree Sweeper will flag things like that so that you can at least take a look at them. And then we've got, in addition to unrealistic, we've got impossible. So if someone is living to, 150, probably not. There's probably some kind of mistake there. It looks for people, oh, excuse me, we're talking about children here. So if someone is having a child at, 150, that's not going to happen unless you're, Sarah in the Old Testament. But, well, she was 90, right? But anyway, the point is it's going to look for these unrealistic or impossible childbearing ages. Then also it's going to look for people living to improbable ages. So if you've got someone living to be 105, could that happen? Yeah. It's a little bit unusual, quite a bit unusual actually. So it flags that so that you can look into that and see, did they really live to 105, or is there a typo or something? And then of course, if someone's, 250 years old, that there's got to be some mistake there. Also, it checks for logical errors like people being christened before they were born and many other errors. And we'll be looking at the different types of errors that Tree Sweeper can check for in just a few minutes. Just to be clear, Tree Sweeper is a tool. It's not magic, so it's not something that you can just click a button and everything will magically be fixed in Family Tree. That's not the purpose. I know we've got some great artificial intelligence in the world right now, and maybe someday we'll get that, where we'll just be able to click a button and artificial intelligence will clean up our tree. But for now, we actually need to work with our tools. We've got tools that help us, and then we have to use our common sense and historical records, and also the guidance of the Holy Spirit. So Tree Sweeper doesn't fix mistakes for us, but what it does is it finds mistakes so that we can use tools to fix them and use our common sense and historical records and so forth. So how do you use Tree Sweeper? Well, the first thing that you need to do is have access to it. The way you get that is by going to treesweeper.fhtl.byu.edu, or you can just simply Google Tree Sweeper and it comes up within the first couple of results. When you get there, and actually for those of you who are comfortable doing so, I would encourage you to go there during the webinar and you can follow along or look at the options and see if you have questions. As Bryant mentioned, we'll address those questions at the end. So for sure, if you find questions, make a note of them or remember them so that you can ask them. And I do want to comment too that there's no such thing as a stupid question. I can just about guarantee you that if you have that question, at least half the rest of the people on the webinar are going to have that question too. So we look forward to addressing any questions that you have. Once you've gone to the site, you'll see a login screen similar to this, and you just log in with your family search or church account, username and password. And I love that because you don't have to set up some additional account. And also, I don't think I mentioned this, but this is totally free. So there's no charge for using this site. There's not even a premium version. This is just a free site created by the talented professionals in the Family History Technology Lab just because they want to help people do family history, which is awesome. So when you sign into TreeSweeper, this is what you'll see. Let's go ahead and take a quick tour of the interface so that you know what's available. On the left side of the screen, you're going to see the sweep options. These are extremely simple to set up, but I found them to be surprisingly powerful and customizable so that you can pretty much search your tree for any combination of errors that TreeSweeper looks for. And again, we're going to look at those in more detail. But for now, be aware the options are on the left side, and then your results are going to show up here in the right side of the screen. We'll see those in a minute. And then finally, when you sign into TreeSweeper, you will always see this help message up here. Now, I haven't found a way to disable it, but to keep it from ever showing up, but it's okay because it's so easy to cancel. You just click right on the message or any place in the screen if you don't need to see this message. On the other hand, if you would like to look at help, you just click the help link and it's got basic guidelines on using TreeSweeper as well as a very helpful quick tutorial. So that's basically the broad description of the interface. Now let's look in a little more detail at the options. So on the left-hand side, you've got this panel, and the first option is the number of generations that you want to sweep for in your tree. You are generation 0, and of course you're never going to sweep yourself, so you actually can't select generation 0, but you can select generation 1, which would be your parents, all the way to generation 7, which would be your 4th great-grandparents. It's important to note that currently TreeSweeper does not sweep descendants, so you can't have it sweep forward from your, say, great-great-great-grandmother or something, but you can have it sweep backward. And perhaps that will change in the future, I don't know, but for now, know that when you're sweeping, you're going backwards from your starting person. And speaking of starting person, you are the starting person by default. So it says current user, and that is whoever has signed in. But you can click this arrow and enter a PID for any other person in the tree. But again, just keep in mind that you will be sweeping backwards from that person's ancestors. The next thing you do or the next option that you have is to set constraints. Now, constraints may not be a word that we use in day-to-day conversation, so I just wanted to point out that that simply means the type of errors that you want to find. And you'll have 5 choices. If you click this drop-down, you'll see these 5 options. So you can search for everything, and what that means is every type of error that TreeSweeper finds. You can search for research opportunities, which basically means stuff that you would have to do more research on. A couple of examples. If a family was having children, if a couple was having children, say every 2 years for about 8 years, and suddenly there's a gap of 5 years, and then they start having a few more children every 2 years, you can guess that possibly there's some kids missing in that gap. And so research opportunities will point you to those gaps. Another one would be duplicates. So if you want to, when there are duplicates that show up in family tree, sometimes they are duplicates, sometimes they aren't. And so that's why it's considered a research opportunity, because TreeSweeper will point out those possible duplicates, and then you can go through and determine whether they are really duplicates or not. Possible errors is the next category. Like we mentioned, can a woman have a child at 55? Yeah, but it's not necessarily that common. And so possible errors will flag things that you probably want to check into. They may or may not be errors, but there's a good chance that they are. Then the next category is definite errors. And those are errors that are absolutely, definitely, indisputably wrong, such as a child being born before her parents, or a son being born after the father dies, and it is that father's son. So these are absolute definite errors that need some kind of fix to them. And then the last category is custom constraints. And all that means is that it's kind of like everything, except you can mix and match. You can choose what pieces of everything or what type of errors you want to search for. So you just pick whatever is relevant to you. And I'll show an example of choosing custom constraints. Down here, we've got the categories that the errors fall into. So Tree Sweeper has chosen 5 different types of categories for their errors. And you've got parent-child relationships. Those include errors like a child being born after the mother dies or something like that. Christening errors include errors like a child being christened at an unlikely age or being christened before they were born. Lifespan errors include things like a person living too long. In fact, I think that's pretty much it, is that if a person is living beyond a reasonable age. Marriage errors are obviously errors related to marriage dates and locations and such. Research errors we talked about those before, that those are errors of where you'd have an opportunity to do more research to resolve that error. I wanted to open up the possible errors for the parent-child relationship just to show you what it looks like and kind of how it works. So under each category, you're going to get a list of specific errors that Tree Sweeper sweeps for. So for the parent-child relationship errors, you see that the parent should have a realistic age. You shouldn't have a mom having kids when she's 2. Parents' children should be born during their lifespan, not before or after. A person should not have too many kids. So if you see 30 children, probably there's something wrong there. And a person should not be their own ancestor. And that refers to something that's also called a pedigree loop, where you have a person, for instance, imagine that you look at your great-grandmother and the same person is both her father and her son. And we know that that's not possible, so we've got to fix that error, and that's what this error is referring to. Just in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all the other categories, but you can do that on your own and just look through the different types of errors that are caught within each category. Okay, we're ready to look at our example of a simple sweep. So I am going to, for this sweep, accept the default of 3 generations. But I'm not going to accept the default of starting with me. Instead, I want to go to my great-grandmother. So I picked someone else from this drop-down, the choice of someone else, and then I went over to Family Tree and I just copied my great-grandmother's PID and I pasted it in here. And just in case PID is an unfamiliar term to anybody who's watching this webinar, that just refers to the unique ID that is assigned to every person in Family Search Family Tree. It's a 7-digit identifier, and it always shows up near the top of the screen. And it always starts with a letter, and then after that, it's a combination of numbers and letters. Well, this one's just letters, but it can be a combination of numbers and letters. And then I decided, instead of choosing possible errors, I only want to deal with definite errors today. I want to deal with things that are absolutely wrong, and I want to get those fixed. And I am going to keep the default settings of any of the categories down here below, so I'm not even going to fuss with those. I'm just going to go ahead and click Start Tree Sweep. When I do that, I get a list of results showing up in the right side of the screen. Let's look at each part of those results to see exactly what we're looking at. So at the top of the results, there's a summary. It's going to show me the total number of the results. So I see here I've got 3 results. Then it's going to show me what category they fall into. Are they definite errors? Are they possible? Are they research opportunity? Since I only requested definite errors, there are 0 possible errors and 0 research opportunities. But if I had included those and any errors had been found, obviously there'd be some numbers there. Down below, I see a list of the people that have the errors. Next to each person are a set of flags. If I were on the website, instead of just looking at a screenshot here, I would be able to hover over and see a description of the flag. But since we're on a screenshot here, let's just walk through what the flags mean. The first one is a red flag for an impossible result, a result that simply could not happen. So we've given some examples of those already. Yellow, as you might guess, is an unlikely result, like a mother having children at age 55. The purple flag is for research results, like possible duplicates. Then finally, this green flag allows you to mark something as okay. So maybe a result was flagged as a probable error, but you look at it and discover that it's really not an error. The mom really did have a kid at 55. So you can actually mark this as okay. And a little bit later, we'll be going into more detail about how to do that and what that means. Then for each person, there are a set of down arrows, and you can click those down arrows for details on the error. So let's take a look at the error details for Elizabeth Newton, our first search result. When I click that arrow, the screen expands and I see a couple of different things. I still see the flags, but I also see a button that I can click to just easily and immediately go to that person's person page in Family Tree. If I wanted to, I could also click this button to set Elizabeth as my starting point for a different sweep, for an additional sweep. I don't want to do that right now. And so what I'm most interested in is looking at the error description. I see that Elizabeth's error is that she was christened before she was born, a logical impossibility. Notice over here on the side, there's another down arrow. So this is one thing I like about Tree Sweeper is it gives you the ability to display just the information you want. If I don't want to see more information over here, I don't have to, but in this case, I'd like to. So I want to see a little bit more, and what I get is some troubleshooting guidance, which is so helpful, and it's customized to the type of error that you're looking at. So in this case, Tree Sweeper says to me, basically, you've got to figure out, was Elizabeth really born in 1828? Because if she was, that christening date can't be right. But was she really christened in 1826? Because if she was, this birth date can't be right. So I mentioned to you the mark as okay or the mark okay button, and it shows here after you've drilled all the way down. And I think there's a good reason for that because you really don't want to mark something okay unless you've looked into it a bit. What happens when you mark OK, or rather, the purpose of marking OK is just for your own tracking reasons. So if you click OK, it actually does not change anything in Family Tree. And not only that, it's only for the current sweep. So if I were to click OK, mark OK, and then finish my research and correction, and then run another sweep, and Elizabeth showed up in it, she would not be marked okay in that next sweep. It's only for your own tracking purposes in this particular sweep. So when I mark Elizabeth okay, which actually I really wouldn't do in this case, but just for illustration purposes, notice that the red flag, which used to say one mistake, now switches to 0, and the green flag switches to 1 to say that I have marked this one person okay. And the time that that's really useful is when we maybe are done with Elizabeth and we go back to the whole results, the whole list of results, and we can tell who we've looked at, who we've marked okay, and who we still need to research. Another thing I wanted to point out really quickly is that there is a button for downloading results. That when I clicked that button, I got something different than I was expecting. And so I wanted to mention that to you. And it's not a bad thing. It's just on a lot of other sites, when you click a button like this, you get an Excel file, or you get what is known as a comma delimited file, or CSV for comma separated values. and that can be imported into a spreadsheet. But that's not what you get when you click this button. What you actually get is a PDF that shows you what you would see if you had expanded every single search result. So if you have a lot of search results, you might find it more useful to click that download button, get this PDF, and then just work from the PDF instead of working from that screen, that result screen in TreeSweeper. So let's walk through now. You remember I mentioned that TreeSweeper is not magic. It really is a tool, a very good tool that helps us correct the mistakes that we find in Family Tree. So TreeSweeper makes it very easy to pop over to Family Search. And so I'm going to click that, and it takes me straight over to Elizabeth's page. And I see the exact same error as I saw in TreeSweeper because this is where TreeSweeper got the mistake from. And so my first question here is, what are the sources for these two events? What's the birth source and what's the christening source? I'm going to start with the christening source. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but it's got an exact date. And anytime I see an exact date, I feel like that's a little more trustworthy than maybe just a year. And so I'm going to pop over here to the sources for Elizabeth and see if I can find any source that substantiates this christening. And lo and behold, when I come over, the first source is a christening for Elizabeth Newton. Not only that, it has a banner up here, a little message that says this extracted IGI record was used to create this person. Now, for those of us who would like an explanation in plain English, what that means is back in the olden days when people did indexing and they called it extraction, a lot of those records that were indexed were used to make family tree people, such as Elizabeth. This banner right here is telling me that Elizabeth was created from an old extracted, what we would call indexed, an old extracted record. So I've now learned something very important about this record, and that is that this christening information is absolutely dependable. It is correct for Elizabeth because it was used to create her person in Family Tree. Now, one thing I did want to point out, if you are unfamiliar with extraction and IGI records and so forth, as many of us are, we've got a whole webinar on this. So if you go to that webinar page that Bryant mentioned at the beginning, that's got the whole list of all our webinars, you'll be able to find a webinar on the understanding the IGI, and that will give you more information on, what the IGI was, where the records came from, and all that good stuff. And it is quite interesting, actually, but you don't have to understand it to just know that this family tree person was created from this christening record and therefore is very reliable. Oh, the other thing I wanted to point out, the only time this banner wouldn't be reliable is when a bad merge was done. And so you would want to look in the changelog and see if a bad merge had taken place. I did check the changelog before this webinar, and we're not going to take the time to look at that right now, but there were absolutely no merges to Elizabeth's record. And so for that reason, we know that this information is reliable and the christening date is correct. So the next thing I want to do is figure out, where did that 1828 date come from? If we're very confident that Elizabeth was christened in 1826, that's a problem to have an 1828 birth date. So I want to find out, how reliable is that information? So to do that, I'm going to go to the changelog. And again, it's beyond the scope of this webinar to go into great detail about the changelog. But on our webinar page, we have another webinar on the changelog. It's called Mysteries of the Changelog. And it helps you understand what you're looking at in the changelog and what some of the more useful features are of the changelog. But in this example, I have gone to the changelog for Elizabeth Newton, and I have filtered to only birth information, because right now, that's all I'm interested in. I want to know where this 1828 birth date came from and how reliable it is. You're probably, or you may be aware that the changelog is in reverse chronological order, which means that oldest entries are at the bottom and newest entries are at the top. So I'm going to start at the bottom, and I find something very interesting here. And that is that this birth was originally the same as the christening date, and it was the way it was in the old system. Anytime you see, and that's new, quote unquote, family search, anytime you see a date of 2012 and a contributor of family search, it in every single instance that I'm familiar with, it means that it came over from the old system called New Family Search. So this is the way the information was in the old system, but that right there is a red flag. For those of you who have done a lot of work with christening, you, especially in nations where they either there were adherents to the Catholic faith or the Church of England faith, uh, churches like that where they believed that if a child was not baptized at birth, that they actually, their eternal progression was stopped, that they ended up in a kind of eternal limbo. It wasn't really purgatory, but it wasn't a place of salvation. So these parents who belonged to the religions that taught that obviously were very highly motivated to get their children christened or baptized. And so if it looked like a child would die soon after birth, that was the only time that a child was christened, on the day that they were born. So for me to determine whether this was the correct birth date, I would want to actually find that christening record and look at it and see if there was any evidence that the child was born on this date, or if there was evidence of a private baptism. Again, because, to keep the webinar from getting too long, I'll just tell you that I went out to find my past, found that christening record, looked at the image, and there was no evidence that Elizabeth had a private baptism or that she was born on the same day she was christened. There was also ample evidence that she lived long enough to marry and have a family, and so I am now very certain that this birth date is not correct. Well, another user came along in 2013 and also came to the conclusion that that birth date was not correct. And so that user removed this birth date. You see over here, it says birth removed. So she erased this birth date, which is fine. That's not a wrong thing to do. The christening was still there, and there wasn't any strong evidence of the actual birth date. Well, a few years later, another user came and saw that the birth date was missing and added a birth date. And bless this user's heart for putting a reason statement, because she just made our job so much easier to assess the reliability of this birth year. She said that she took it from the England and Wales census in 1851. Well, number one, most of us are probably aware that census birth years are a little bit fuzzy because they're calculated off of an age. And the age could be before, or excuse me, the birthday of that person could be before or after the date that the census was taken. So you can see there's some fuzziness there as far as calculating a birth year. Not only that, our dear Elizabeth was born, or probably born very close to, excuse me, she was christened very close to 1827. So probably she was born kind of close to 1827. And so that being the case, a calculated birth year of 1828 in the census really isn't that far off. So we can see that, that's a reasonable birth year for her from a census. We would want to look in the census and see if this census really was for her. So I did check that, and it really was for this Elizabeth Newton. It had all the correct family members, everything lined up, so we're comfortable with that. So based on the fact that this user added a birth date that was only an approximate birth date on the census, I now feel very comfortable correcting that birth date to be more in line with the christening date. So the way that I do that is go out of the changelog and go back to Elizabeth's details page, and I click edit. When I do that, I get the edit birth screen. And so I'm going to come up here to the date of birth, and I'm going to type about 1826. About is an acceptable term in family search birth fields. And so the reason I like to put about there is it's a flag to me and to other users that I still don't have exact proof of the birth, but I'm pretty sure that it's close to this. I've done the best I can to figure it out. So I'm going to say about. I'm not absolutely positive, but I'm pretty comfortable. The birthplace I didn't change because that nothing had changed in the source. Like, I didn't get any evidence in sources that that was wrong. It was always Boothby Grapho. But then in the reason statement, I did change that to say that I had inferred the birth year from the christening year. Before, the other user took it from the census, and I'm so glad she included that reasoning. But now that reasoning is no longer valid, so I erased that, and I put this reason in instead. And then I click Save, and we have fixed the error. And when I run another sweep in Tree Sweep, that error will not show up. Okay, let's move on to our second example. On this one, I'm going to show how to set some custom constraints. We're not going to go through the whole thing of how to fix the error. I just wanted to show that one of Elizabeth because it just kind of gives an illustration of what you could do to research an error. But in this case, we're going to do a custom sweep, and I'm going to do 7 generations this time. I'm going to switch it to someone else, my maternal grandmother. So I've gone out to Family Tree and I've grabbed her PID. And this time, I am worried about duplicates. So I am going to choose research opportunities because that is the type of constraint that includes duplicates. And if you wonder what constraints are included, what types of errors are looked for, in other words, you just click the down arrow next to each of these categories and it gives you that list. So in this case, I am going to click the down arrow next to research, and by default, everything was checked. So when I chose research opportunities, Tree Sweeper clicked all these buttons, and it was going to do a search for every single one of these. But remember, I only want to look at things pertaining to duplicates. So I went in here and just unchecked the first 5. And that's what I love, is you can go to any category in here and you can check and uncheck any option to run exactly the search that you want to run. So in this case, I want to look for parents with duplicate children, children with duplicate parents, and people with duplicate spouses. And after I click those, just let those options be clicked, then I click Start Tree Sweep. And these are the results that I get. In this case, I've got Mary Pendlebury with 6 possible duplicates. So I definitely want to look at more information about that. So I'm going to click this button, and then I was going to say Family Tree. No, we're in Tree Sweeper. Tree Sweeper gives me the list of all those duplicates. So I do want to comment on one thing here. Sometimes people see these mistakes and they feel discouraged. And I want to encourage you not to feel discouraged. It is a wonderful thing to have a collaborative tree, and it's also a wonderful thing that we can work together with each other to clean up the tree and fix these mistakes. So look at the opportunity to fix mistakes as a very positive thing. And also, when you go in and fix mistakes, if you, for instance, add sources and reason statements, you actually stop further mistakes from being made. Well, there's not a guarantee there, but you're more likely to stop further mistakes from being made. And especially if you get into somebody's record, like imagine that we had got into Elizabeth's record and there were absolutely no sources except that one christening record. So that tells me, hey, you could look for other records about this person and find out, who was her family? Did she marry? Did she have kids? That kind of thing. So it gives you an opportunity basically to add more sources, add more information, and thus also reduce the chances of errors being put on that person's record. So look at errors as a great opportunity to make the tree more accurate. Another thing that I found is that if you look at in your changelog or any of the edit screens that show you who put the incorrect information there, it also will very often give you a username, and that gives you a great opportunity to collaborate with that person. So as an example, one day my sister went in and found a bad merge on one of her husband's people, and she clicked on the person who had, or clicked on the name of the person who had made that merge, and she contacted them. And of course you don't want to, I mean, it goes without saying, right? You don't want to contact that person and say, what were you thinking? You totally messed this up, because that's just so counterproductive, and you don't even know the circumstance of that person. And actually my sister's experience illustrates that. So she contacted the person and just said, hey, I noticed that you did this merge, and I just wanted you to know that I did a little research and found out that these two people actually are not the same person. So I have undone the merge. And if you have any questions, please message me back. I'd be glad to collaborate with you on this. Well, she very quickly got a message back from this person saying, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. And just as an aside here, that seems to be the usual reaction of people. They feel so bad when they found a mistake, excuse me, even if you are very gracious about it. And the reason I bring that up is just that people aren't malicious most of the time. They're not trying to mess up the tree, and they feel bad when they discover that they have done so. So this woman said to my sister, you know, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. And the reason I did this was because on the tree, on the person page, family search said possible duplicate. So she had misinterpreted possible duplicates to probably mean definite duplicates. And she had merged two people that really shouldn't have been merged. So my point on that is, well, a couple of points is always be gracious and kind to people that you contact about mistakes. And then number two, you can open up a collaboration with that person. You might meet a family member that you wouldn't otherwise meet. So cleaning up things in Family Tree is really a wonderful opportunity. And then I'll also say this for any of you who are people of faith, which I imagine are most of the people listening to this webinar. I have really felt the, what would I call it? The approbation of the Holy Spirit as I've cleaned up these messes. I've even sometimes felt gratitude for the people themselves, that they're grateful that I'm cleaning up the mistakes that are on their pages in Family Tree. I think we all know that family history is a spiritual work, and you don't have to necessarily adhere to any certain religion to find family history to be a spiritual work, because people who don't belong to any church at all have still felt the presence of their ancestors in doing family history. So I can tell you that I have felt the Holy Spirit as I've been cleaning up these things, and I felt the gratitude of some of my ancestors beyond the veil, that I was making their record more accurate, and maybe, for instance, getting them disconnected from the wrong spouse and put together with the right spouse, or that I've had, you know, put right children with them and disconnected wrong children with them, that kind of thing. So look at these errors as a great opportunity to do a service to people and to help the tree be more accurate. So that brings us to the conclusion of our webinar. Let's just wrap up. We talked about what Tree Sweeper is and why it's helpful. We talked about how to use it, and then we gave a couple of examples, a very simple one, and then one where we showed you how to select custom constraints. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us for the webinar today. If you have questions, we can address them right now, or you can also email me at this address later on, and I'd be happy to respond to any questions that you have. So Bryant, I will turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Kathryn. It looks like we have a couple questions, and if you have any questions while we're talking as well, please feel free to post them in the chat box. The first one says, can you print the list of duplicates?
Yes, that is a very good question. The way that you would do that is click that download button and you'd get a PDF and then you would print the PDF. Another thing you could do is just do a print screen from your browser using your browsers. Well, excuse me, no, there's three options. So you could do a print screen there just doing Alt Print on your keyboard. That's for PCs, you guys. I don't know what it would be on a Mac. If anybody's using a Mac and knows how to do a screen print, could you please post that in the chat? And then the other is that you can use your browser's print function, which is just to print, like on Chrome, for instance, you would click those three dots for the menu, those three dots on the right-hand side at the top, and then I believe there's a print function on there, or there's a way to get to it from there. So there would be those three options: print, download and print the PDF, do a print screen using your keyboard, or use your browser's print function. Thank you. Very good question.
Awesome. And it looks like the next question, it was probably referencing an earlier slide, but it says, does Family Tree find these duplicates also?
That is a very good question, and it does. So those duplicates will show up on the person page because TreeSweeper actually uses family search information. And my understanding is that it uses the same, that's not exactly accurate. How do I say this well? TreeSweeper looks in Family Tree and says, Family Tree, who have you flagged as duplicates? And then it returns those duplicates in the search results. So the advantage that the question that follows then is, well, if I can already see these duplicates in Family Tree, why do I need Tree Sweeper? And the advantage of Tree Sweeper is it will search for duplicates on multiple people at a time. So you saw when I was searching for duplicates, I searched on 7 generations, and then I got that list. And I could have, who knows, I could have potentially gotten a list for maybe 50 duplicates or something. There's not a way in Family Tree to bring up a list of all the people on your tree with duplicates. So very good question. And thank you, Claudia, for pointing out that Shift Command 3 is the way that you take screen prints on a Mac.
Awesome. Great answers, Kathryn. We'll
Thanks.
wait just one more minute to see if anyone has any other questions.
Okay. Oh, good question, Ida. Which constraints would you recommend for a beginner to family history? I probably wouldn't recommend using Tree Sweeper for an absolute beginner. I'm a state consultant in my state right now, so I do work with a lot of beginners. And one thing that is so important for beginners is to have a successful experience. And usually, cleaning up mistakes is not a successful experience for a beginner. So for a beginner, what I'll normally do is try and help them find a clean place on the tree where they can add some people that are missing and add the sources and so forth. So while I wouldn't do it for an absolute beginner, Ida, to your point, then once the person has, maybe if you're a consultant and once you've met with the person a few times and they maybe find some errors in Family Tree and they say, wow, I'd really like to clean these up. You could take them over to Tree Sweeper, and probably one of the simplest errors to clean up are births before christenings. That's one reason that I showed those in the webinar today, because usually you can resolve those pretty easily. What else would be, yeah, I probably wouldn't do duplicates. Yeah, probably start with something in parent-child relationships that would be pretty easy to troubleshoot. Thank you, Ida, for that very helpful question.
Well, if that's all the questions, we'd just like thank you, Kathryn, for the awesome webinar, and thank you
You're
everyone
welcome.
for participating. And just like to remind everyone about our upcoming webinar. It looks like, sorry, we have one more question. It says, can it search for duplicates.
And Rosa, I assume when you mean can it search for duplicates, you mean tree sweeper, right? Not family search or family tree. And the answer to that question is yes. You can choose the settings such that tree sweeper will sweep for duplicates. Thank you for asking that.
Thank you, Kathryn. We'd just like to remind everyone about our webinar next week, and that'll be on Friday at 4 p.m. at the same time. And that'll be with James Tanner. So we hope to have you join us next time. Thanks everyone for joining us this time, and have a great day.